My name is Cora Bellamy. I'm 32 years old and I live in a small, cedar-shingled cottage nestled in the quiet Laurelhurst neighborhood of Portland, Oregon. 6 months ago, I married Rowan Blackwood, and 3 months after that, I officially became the keeper of my grandmother Iris's legacy, a legacy that came in the form of 3 properties scattered across the city. I didn't tell anyone. Not Rowan, not his formidable family, not a single soul. We were married on a crisp October day, the air smelling of wood smoke and damp earth. The ceremony was small, held in a historic chapel in the woods, sunlight filtering through stained glass to dapple the pews in jewel tones. Rowan, his hand warm and steady in mine, promised we would build our life from the ground up, brick by brick, together. I smiled, a genuine, heart-deep smile, but a quiet corner of my mind knew the truth. I wasn't starting from scratch, not in the way he imagined. Iris was the root system of my life. She was a woman carved from resilience, a product of a time when financial autonomy for women was a radical notion. After my grandfather passed away unexpectedly young, she raised my mother alone, quietly and methodically building a small but formidable real estate portfolio. For most of my life, I believed she only owned the little cottage where she lived, the one with the climbing roses and the porch swing that overlooked the park. The truth was, she'd been cultivating her assets for decades, a secret gardener tending to a hidden world. The day she passed, a profound stillness settled over me. It wasn't a sharp, sudden grief, but a deep, resonant ache. She was my last living relative, the woman who had taught me everything from how to press flowers in a heavy book to how to read a prospectus. A month after her simple, quiet funeral, her solicitor, a kind, silver-haired man named Mr. Abernathy, summoned me to his downtown office. I expected he'd pass along a few keepsakes, her worn gold locket, perhaps a box of her sepia-toned photographs. Instead, he slid a thick leather portfolio across his mahogany desk. Inside were the deeds. 3 of them. There was a stunning 2-bedroom brownstone in the elegant Nob Hill neighborhood, valued at well over $1 million. There was a sleek, modern condominium in the Pearl District with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Willamette River, worth nearly as much. And finally, her own beloved cottage, the place I now called home. All told, her legacy was worth close to $2.5 million. My hands shook as I signed the papers, the ink bleeding slightly on the heavy parchment. Mr. Abernathy watched me over the rim of his spectacles. "Cora," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "your grandmother was exceptionally clear. These properties are yours, and yours alone. She had one piece of advice she insisted I pass on to you." He leaned forward slightly. "Never let another person's ambition dictate the fate of what you have earned or inherited. Not even someone you love." At the time, Rowan and I were still floating in the sweet, hazy aftermath of our wedding. He was kind, understanding, and didn't press me when I hesitated to merge our finances. I mumbled something about wanting to maintain a little independence, and he nodded, accepting it as a modern quirk. But I knew my reluctance was rooted in something deeper. It was rooted in experience. I had once dated a man who, with a charming smile, had borrowed several $1,000s from our joint account for a can't-miss tech startup that missed spectacularly. Before him, there was another who saw my more stable income as a perpetual safety net for his own financial whims. Trust, for me, was a structure that had been damaged before, and I was rebuilding it carefully, joist by joist. Rowan, I was certain, was different. He was a landscape architect, a man who found poetry in blueprints and urban green spaces. He worked for his family's business, Blackwood Vineyards and Hospitality, a name synonymous with old Portland wealth. He called it comfortable, not ostentatious, but his mother, Eleanora Blackwood, was a woman I had yet to decipher. Countless nights I lay awake, staring at the familiar shadows the old maple tree cast on my bedroom ceiling. Was I beginning my marriage with a deception? Or was I honoring the hard-won wisdom of the woman who raised me? In those quiet, searching moments, I could almost hear Iris's voice, a low, steady murmur, just as it had sounded when I was a girl shelling peas beside her at the kitchen table. "Sweetheart, not everyone who loves you for the right reasons. Some love the idea of you, and some love what you possess. The sooner you learn the difference, the less it will sting. I first met Eleonora at what was billed as a casual family dinner at the Blackwood Estate, a sprawling, Tudor-style home in the West Hills with gardens that cascaded down the slope toward the city lights below. She greeted me not at the door, but at the base of a grand, curving staircase, descending as if making an entrance. She wore a silk blouse the color of cream and a watch so fine and delicate it seemed to be woven from light itself. "So, you're Cora," she said. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, yet it carried an unnerving precision. "Rowan speaks of you. Constantly." I shook her hand, my own feeling plain and unremarkable against the cool, perfumed smoothness of her skin. She didn't smile, not really. Her head tilted, and her eyes, a pale, intelligent gray, did a slow, methodical sweep from my simple leather flats to the knot of hair at the nape of my neck. It was the look of an appraiser valuing an object of uncertain provenance. Dinner was served in a room paneled with dark, lustrous wood, a crystal chandelier scattering rainbows across the table. Eleonora presided from the head, with Rowan to her right. I was placed across from her, beside a floral arrangement so large it felt like a silent, fragrant chaperone. "And what is it you do again, dear?" she asked, just as the waiter served the soup. Her tone was airy, as if inquiring about a hobby. "I'm a botanical archivist at the university," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "I preserve and catalog historical plant specimens." How quaint," she murmured, a flicker of a smile finally touching her lips. "A field like that, it's not particularly lucrative, is it?" "More of a passion, I imagine." I met her gaze over my water glass. I was no stranger to these politely veiled inquiries, these little tests wrapped in civility. But it was her next questions that sent a prickle of unease down my spine. "And your parents?" "They passed away some time ago," I said softly. "I was raised by my grandmother." "Ah, yes." "Iris," she said, her eyes now on the wine swirling in her glass. I froze. My fork hovered over my plate. I had never, not once, mentioned my grandmother's name to Eleonora. "I believe I met her once," Eleonora continued, her tone still casual. "At a fundraising gala for the Art Museum, years ago." I simply nodded, but inside, a cold dread began to bloom. A gala? Iris would have rather spent an evening alphabetizing her seed packets. She loathed those events, calling them peacock parades for people with more money than sense. The lie was small, but it was a signal. Eleonora had been doing her research. The dinner concluded with handshakes that felt more like dismissals and a vague invitation to come by any time. As Rowan drove me home, I knew Eleonora Blackwood wasn't just a difficult mother-in-law. She was a strategist. A week later, an email appeared in my inbox from a Ms. Isabelle Renaud, identifying herself as a former acquaintance of Iris's and warmly inviting me to a private legacy planning workshop at a boutique hotel downtown. It seemed innocuous enough until a quick search revealed Ms. Renaud was a wealth manager who had, for over a decade, been on retainer with Blackwood Vineyards. I deleted the email without replying. 2 days after that, I noticed a man in a nondescript sedan parked across the street from my cottage. He was pretending to read a newspaper, but his gaze kept flicking to my front door, to the address numbers, to the windows. I wasn't being paranoid. I had been raised by a woman who taught me that when someone takes an inordinate interest in your life, you must ask yourself what they stand to gain. 3 days later, Rowan came home from work and dropped a glossy brochure onto the kitchen counter. "Mom sent this over," he said, kissing my cheek. I picked it up. It was a market analysis for my specific neighborhood, filled with charts and graphs about rising property values. Tucked inside was a note in Eleonora's elegant, slanted script. "This area is becoming quite sought after. It's important to know the value of one's assets." I looked at Rowan. "Did you tell her I own this cottage?" "No, of course not." "Why?" "I think your mother is investigating me, Rowan." He laughed, a full, easy sound that died in his throat when he saw the look on my face. "You're serious?" I nodded. For the first time, a shadow of uncertainty crossed his features. The next morning, as the coffee maker gurgled, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. "Is this Cora Bellamy?" a crisp, professional voice asked. "Yes. My name is Helena. I am the assistant to Mrs. Eleonora Blackwood's legal counsel. She would like to arrange a private meeting to discuss long-term financial integration within the family." My grip tightened on my mug. I have no intention of discussing my personal finances with anyone but my husband. Mrs. Blackwood believes it is a necessary step to ensure the family's continued stability and prosperity. "I'm sure she does," I said, and hung up, my heart thudding a nervous rhythm against my ribs. It felt as if a fine, invisible net was being cast over me, its threads tightening with each passing day. That evening, I pulled out Iris's old leather-bound journal. Tucked into the back pocket was a folded piece of paper. In her familiar, looping script, she had written, "If they seek to control what is yours, it is not a sign of love. It is a test of your strength. Do not fail it." Rowan left for a viticulture conference in Napa Valley early on a Monday morning. Before he left, he held my face in his hands. "Try to be patient with my mom, Cora. She just worries." I nodded, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. I didn't want to be the source of friction in his family, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was the target of a quiet, calculated campaign. The first few days of his absence were a welcome reprieve. The silence in the cottage was gentle, broken only by the rustle of leaves and the distant chime of a streetcar. I used the time to go through my accounts, to arrange for a minor roof repair on the Nob Hill brownstone, and to review the lease agreement for the Pearl District condo. I felt capable, in control. I felt like Iris's granddaughter. Then, on Thursday afternoon, the doorbell rang. I was expecting a package and opened the door without checking the peephole. My heart dropped. On my porch stood Eleonora Blackwood, wrapped in a camel hair coat that probably cost more than my first car. Beside her stood a man with silver hair and a somber expression, carrying a slim leather briefcase. Mr. Abernathy, it was not. "Cora, darling," Eleonora said, her voice as smooth as cream. "I do hope we're not disturbing you. I've brought Mr. Thorne, our family's notary. There are just a few simple documents we'd like to go over with you." I didn't move. I kept my hand firmly on the doorknob, blocking the entrance. "What kind of documents?" "Oh, just formalities," she said, gliding past me into the living room as if she had been invited. "Asset management protocols. To streamline everything and protect it for the future." Mr. Thorne followed her, his shoes silent on my hardwood floors. He placed his briefcase on my small dining table and clicked it open, revealing stacks of pristine, intimidating paperwork. The cottage, my sanctuary, suddenly felt small and claustrophobic. "I understand Iris left you a few investments," Eleonora said, settling into my favorite armchair as if it were a throne. "It's wonderful, really. I simply want to help you organize them properly. The Blackwood family has always utilized a trust. It's far more efficient for tax purposes and mitigates any potential risks." I stared at the documents. The text was a dense, impenetrable wall of legalese. "I haven't agreed to put my assets into any trust," I said, my voice quiet but unyielding. "And Rowan has never mentioned this to me." "Oh, Rowan needn't be troubled with these details," she waved a dismissive hand. "This is a woman's domain. Managing the family security. Even Rowan's sister, Pippa, placed her inheritance into the trust when she married. It's just what we do." My hands curled into fists at my sides. "Are you asking me to sign over control of my inheritance to your family?" "Not to the family, dear. To the trust," she corrected gently, her eyes like chips of ice. "For the benefit of everyone. Alistair and I are the trustees, of course, but it's a safeguard for us all." I didn't answer. I walked to the table and picked up the top document. My eyes scanned the clauses until they landed on Section 3, Article B, full and irrevocable authority over the management, liquidation, or leveraging of all assets contained herein shall reside with the appointed trustees. "No," I said, placing the document back on the table with a soft, definitive thud. "I will not be signing this. These properties were my grandmother's. They are now mine. I will not relinquish control of them." Mr. Thorne shifted his weight, a flicker of surprise in his professional impassivity. Eleonora, however, merely sighed, as if dealing with a recalcitrant child. Cora, I'm not sure you understand the benefits. I understand perfectly, I cut in, my voice gaining strength. And I also understand what it means to bring a notary into someone's home unannounced to pressure them into signing legal documents. That is not respectful. That is not family. Her mask of polite concern finally slipped. Her voice took on a steely edge. You must remember, Rowan is our only son. What you possess will eventually become part of the Blackwood legacy. No, I said, looking her directly in the eye. It is part of the Bellamy legacy. And if you think for one moment that Rowan would approve of this ambush, you don't know your own son at all. As if on cue, my phone rang. The screen lit up. Rowan. I answered and put the call on speakerphone. Hey, everything okay? Rowan's voice, warm and familiar, filled the tense silence. Mom sent me a weird text saying she was stopping by to help you with some planning. She's here, I said, my voice level. In my living room. With a notary named Mr. Thorne. They've brought documents for me to sign, to transfer my grandmother's properties into the Blackwood Family Trust. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy and absolute. Then, Rowan's voice came back, tight with disbelief and anger. Mom, what the hell are you doing? Rowan, I am simply doing what is best, Eleonora began, her composure faltering for the first time. No, he cut her off. I'm flying home tomorrow. First flight out. You will not pressure Cora to sign a single thing. That is her property. It is not yours, it is not the family's, and it is not collateral for your ambitions. After he hung up, Eleonora stood slowly, her face a mask of cold fury. You are playing a very foolish game, Cora. I held her gaze. No, you just lost one. When the door finally closed behind them, the silence they left was deafening. I stood in the middle of my living room, my body trembling with adrenaline and a profound, bone-deep sense of violation. Sleep was impossible that night. Every creak of the old house sounded like an intrusion. Every shadow held Eleonora's cold, appraising stare. She hadn't tried to persuade me with logic or love. She had issued a directive, confident that her power was absolute. But she was wrong. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, I was at my computer. I brewed a strong pot of coffee and drafted an email to Mr. Abernathy, Iris's solicitor. Subject: Urgent, fortification of independent trust. Dear Mr. Abernathy, I was pressured yesterday to sign documents transferring my inherited assets into an external family trust. I require your immediate assistance in implementing every possible legal safeguard to protect my soul and independent ownership. Please be in touch at your earliest convenience. He called within the hour. Cora, I have all of Iris's original, notarized directives. We can reinforce the trust's bylaws immediately. We can add a clause requiring your in-person, verified consent for any transaction over $1,000. We can make it legally ironclad. Please, I said, my voice thick with relief. Do it. I will handle the legal side, he said, his tone turning serious. But you, my dear, must be careful. People like Eleonora Blackwood don't give up easily. I hung up the phone and took a deep, shuddering breath. Rowan would be home in a few hours. The time for secrets was over. I wasn't sure how he would react to the full truth, but I knew I couldn't face this alone. This wasn't just a battle for my inheritance, it was a battle for the soul of my marriage. Rowan arrived late that afternoon, his face etched with exhaustion and worry. The first thing he saw when he walked through the door was the thick portfolio I had left on the dining table. Is this it? He asked, his voice raw. I nodded. She brought a notary, Rowan. She laid out the papers and told me it was just what the family does. He sank onto the sofa, running a hand through his hair. He was silent for a long time, the weight of the moment pressing down on the small room. Why would she do that? He finally whispered. You should ask her, I said gently. But this isn't the first time she's tried to control someone with their finances, is it? He didn't deny it. He just looked at the floor. When she texted me, did you know she would do something like this? I knew she was up to something, I admitted. I just didn't think she would be this brazen. He looked up then, and I took a deep breath. It was time. I sat across from him, opened the portfolio, and laid everything out on the coffee table between us. The deeds to the Nob Hill brownstone, the rental statements from the Pearl District condo, the appraisal for the cottage. A summary of the total value. It's worth about $2.5 million, I said, my voice even. The condo and the brownstone are rented, generating a steady income. This cottage was Iris's. I kept it for us. I didn't tell you before because of my past experiences. I needed to know our foundation was solid. I needed to know I could trust you, not just with my heart, but with my independence. He didn't look angry. He looked sad. You thought I would try to take it from you? No, I said honestly. But I know what the pressure of money can do to people. I had to be sure. He bowed his head, his fingers lacing together. My mom, she did this to my sister Pippa. Her husband had a small inheritance from his grandfather. Mom convinced them it was safer in the family trust. Now she holds it over them. Pippa can't make a major financial decision without her approval. She's too afraid to fight back, terrified she'll be cut out of the will entirely. A cold knot formed in my stomach. You knew this? And you didn't warn me? I never thought she'd dare try it with you, he said, his voice laced with self-recrimination. I thought she'd test you, push your boundaries, but I never imagined she would go this far. He looked at me then, truly looked at me, and I saw the conflict warring in his eyes. I won't let her interfere again, Cora. But you have to understand, I can't control her. I'm not asking you to control her, I said, my voice low but firm. I am asking you to stand with me. I need to know whose side you're on. We sat in the quiet of the cottage, the unspoken question hanging in the air between us. No one won that conversation, but a boundary had been drawn. From that moment forward, the lines were clear. I gathered the documents, my hands steady now, and locked them in the small fireproof safe Iris had kept hidden in her closet. Rowan came and stood behind me, resting his hands on my shoulders. I never loved you for what you might have, Cora. I turned to face him. Good, I said. Because now you know exactly what I do have. And I'm not letting it go. Outside the window, the gray Portland sky opened up, and the first drizzles of a long winter rain began to fall. A storm was here. 3 days after the confrontation, my phone rang close to 10 at night. The number was unfamiliar, but a gut feeling, a quiet hum of intuition I'd inherited from Iris, told me to answer. I apologize for the late hour, a man's voice said, hesitant and low. My name is Leo Martinez. I was, until recently, the head accountant for Blackwood Hospitality. I moved into the kitchen, closing the door behind me. My heart began a slow, heavy beat. I'm not sure I understand why you're calling me, Mr. Martinez. I don't know if I should be doing this, he continued, his voice tight with stress, but I think you have a right to know why Eleonora is so fixated on your assets. Go on, I said, sinking into a chair. I was forced to resign 3 weeks ago. I refused to continue falsifying the quarterly reports at Alistair Blackwood's direction. My father-in-law. My hand tightened on the phone. The company is in serious trouble, Mrs. Blackwood. They're leveraged to the hilt. At least $1 million in unreported debt. Part of it is a disastrous hotel venture in the gorge that went bust, but most of it is from Alistair's gambling. The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. Gambling? He has a severe sports betting addiction. It's been an open secret in the inner circle for years, but it's gotten out of control. They've been denied loans from 3 major banks. Their credit is shot. Eleonora has been desperately trying to secure private capital, but they need unencumbered collateral to even get a meeting. I saw it then, the whole ugly picture, sharp and clear. My grandmother's properties. Yes, he confirmed. The plan was to absorb them into the trust, then immediately leverage them for a high-interest loan from a private equity firm. I saw the draft proposal. They were going to do it without your knowledge. A cold, clear anger settled in my chest. Does Rowan know about any of this? I don't believe so. They've always shielded him from the uglier side of the financials. I thanked Mr. Martinez, my mind already racing. This wasn't just about control anymore. It was about survival, theirs at my expense. The next morning, I was in Mr. Abernathy's office. I laid out everything, Leo Martinez's testimony, the documents Eleonora had brought, the entire sordid story. He listened, his expression growing more grave with each word. We need to act decisively, he said when I finished. First, we file a legal notice of disassociation, formally severing your trust from any connection to the Blackwood family's finances or debts. Second, we send a certified letter to the private equity firm they're courting, informing them that any attempt to use your properties as collateral is fraudulent. We cut them off at the source. When I returned home, Rowan was on the sofa, his phone in his hand, his face pale. He looked up as I walked in. "Did you threaten my mother with legal action?" he asked, his voice strained. "What did she tell you?" "Pippa called me. Mom is furious. She said you had a lawyer send a letter to a potential investor and ruined a critical deal." I didn't say a word. I simply opened my laptop, pulled up the files Mr. Abernathy had sent me, and turned the screen toward him. There it was, a copy of the loan proposal Eleonora had drafted, with the Nob Hill brownstone and the Pearl District condo listed under pending collateral assets, right next to my name. Rowan stared at the screen, speechless. "They were going to steal from us, Rowan," I said, my voice devoid of heat, just cold, hard fact. "Behind your back and behind mine." He sagged into the cushions, looking 10 years older. "My dad, he's gambling again, isn't he?" I nodded. "So badly that the company is on the brink of collapse. And your mother's solution wasn't to face the problem, but to sacrifice my future to patch the holes in their sinking ship." Rowan laced his fingers through his hair and let out a short, bitter laugh. "All my life, they told me not to worry about the money. Just focus on the creative side, the design. The finances were for the adults. He looked at me, a man caught between the family he was born into and the family he had chosen. "You know what I'm most ashamed of?" I said softly. He looked up, his eyes filled with a weary pain. "I'm ashamed that I ever believed being quiet would keep the peace. Silence doesn't protect you. It just gives people like your mother permission to take more." "I'll talk to them," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "It's past time for talking, Rowan," I replied, closing the laptop. "You need to choose. Because the next time they come for what's mine, they might not be asking." I no longer needed to channel Iris's wisdom. I was living it. Silence never protects what is rightfully yours. The meeting was set for Saturday afternoon. I chose the venue carefully, the living room of the Nob Hill brownstone. It was a space that radiated quiet elegance and unshakable history, my history. It was my ground. Rowan sat beside me on a velvet sofa, his posture rigid, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Across from us, Eleonora sat ramrod straight in a tailored suit, her expression a careful, unreadable mask. Beside her, Alistair, my father-in-law, looked diminished, his eyes downcast, a slight tremor in his hands. I didn't bother with pleasantries. I opened my laptop and placed it on the coffee table. "I have reviewed your company's financial situation," I began, my voice calm and measured. "I am willing to offer one of my properties, the condo in the Pearl District, as temporary collateral for a restructuring loan. But it will only happen if 3 conditions are met." Eleonora's lips thinned. "What kind of conditions could you possibly be in a position to set?" Rowan turned to her, his voice cutting through the tension. "You should listen to her, Mother. Because if Cora walks away, Blackwood Hospitality will be bankrupt by the end of the year." I met Eleonora's glare without flinching. "Condition 1, Alistair, you will check yourself into the Hazelden Betty Ford Addiction Treatment Center. Not an outpatient program. A full, 90-day inpatient commitment. I have the admissions paperwork right here." Alistair started to speak, a weak protest forming on his lips, but I held up a hand, and he fell silent. "Condition 2, Rowan will be resigning from Blackwood Hospitality, effective immediately. He has accepted a position as a lead designer at a sustainable urban development firm. His financial future will no longer be entangled with this family's mismanagement." Eleonora's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. "My son is abandoning the family business?" "No," Rowan said, his voice firm and clear. "I am choosing to build a life based on transparency and integrity. I am done cleaning up messes I didn't create." I let that sink in before delivering the final blow. "And condition 3, you, Eleonora, will write a formal letter of apology to me. In it, you will acknowledge your attempts to misappropriate my personal property and you will commit, in writing, to never again interfere in my and Rowan's financial or personal lives. Any future family financial discussions that involve us will require both of our signatures to be valid. The silence in the room was absolute. For a woman like Eleanora Blackwood, the demand for an apology was a deeper wound than any financial loss. It was a demand for surrender. "This has gone far enough," I said softly. "You wanted my assets to be part of the Blackwood family. Fine. But you will do it on the terms set by the woman you once deemed not good enough for your son." It was Alistair who broke the silence. He looked up, his eyes watery but resolute. "I'll go," he said, his voice raspy. "I'll go to treatment. Not for the company. Because I can't stand what I've become." Under the table, Rowan's hand found mine and squeezed. Eleanora remained silent, her gaze fixed on me, calculating. It was the look of a chess master who had just been checkmated by a pawn. "I will write the letter," she said finally, her voice clipped. "But I insist on being present at any meetings related to the loan." I almost smiled. "No. You are not a party to this agreement. You are a beneficiary of my goodwill. You will have no oversight and no control." She stood then, her composure finally cracking. "I have compromised enough." "No," I replied, standing to face her. "You have just begun to learn the meaning of respect." As they left, Rowan remained on the sofa, watching the late afternoon sun stream through the tall windows. He turned to me, the quiet of the grand room wrapping around us. "You just did what no one in our family has had the courage to do in 30 years, he said, his voice filled with a quiet awe. I went to him and leaned my head against his shoulder. "I wasn't trying to win," I whispered. "I was just trying not to be erased." A month after that pivotal afternoon, the world began to quietly rearrange itself. Alistair checked into Hazelden as promised. There was no dramatic farewell, just Eleanora, driving him to the facility, her face a stoic mask, though I later heard from Pippa that her hand trembled as she signed the intake forms. Rowan's resignation from Blackwood Hospitality sent a small shockwave through their social circle, but he didn't look back. He threw himself into his new role, designing community gardens and green rooftops. He came home each evening smelling of fresh soil and possibility, a light back in his eyes I hadn't realized had been missing. As for me, I settled into my role as the reluctant but capable steward of Iris's legacy. I hired a sharp, meticulous young woman to help manage the properties, freeing me to focus on my own work at the university. The Nob Hill brownstone, once a battleground, became a source of quiet satisfaction. The Pearl District condo, its value now securing a lifeline for the Blackwood family, became a symbol of a boundary well defended. The biggest surprise was Eleanora. 3 weeks after Alistair's admission, she called and asked to meet for coffee. Her voice was different, still formal, but the icy edge had thawed. We met at a bustling cafe in my neighborhood, a neutral space of my choosing. She arrived not in a power suit, but in soft wool slacks and a simple cashmere sweater, her hair pulled back without its usual severe perfection. "Thank you for seeing me," she said, her hands wrapped around a porcelain mug. I just nodded, waiting. She slid a crisp, white envelope across the table. "This is a signed, hard copy of the apology letter. I wanted you to have it. Not as a legal document, but as a promise." She took a breath. "Alistair is not the man I married. But I enabled him. I spent decades trying to hold the facade together, believing that if I just managed everything tightly enough, it wouldn't all shatter. The tighter I held on, the more I drove my own family away." I listened, a knot in my throat loosening. "Rowan was right," she continued, looking me in the eye. "I treated his marriage to you like a corporate merger. I saw you as a variable I couldn't control, a threat to a structure that was already rotting from the inside. I see that now. For the first time, I saw not the formidable matriarch, but a woman humbled by loss and fear. I don't need an apology to move forward," I said softly. "But I do need to see real change." "You will," she said, her voice firm. "I will never touch your assets or your life again. And, if you'll permit it, I would like to make amends. You once mentioned a scholarship fund to Pippa. For young women, teaching financial literacy." I raised an eyebrow. You remembered that? It's a brilliant idea, she said. A way to honor your grandmother properly. A genuine smile touched my lips for the first time. If you truly want to help, I said, that would be a good place to start. As I walked home, a sense of peace settled over me. We would never be close, Eleonora and I, but we were no longer adversaries. We were simply two women trying to navigate the messy, complicated terrain of family. A few months later, in early March, as the cherry blossoms began to paint the city in strokes of pink and white, I stood in my bathroom, staring at two bright pink lines on a pregnancy test. A deep, profound stillness filled me. It wasn't fear or panic, but a sense of something sacred taking root. I walked out to the living room where Rowan was sketching at his desk. I didn't say a word, I just held up the test. He looked at it, then at me, and a slow, beautiful smile spread across his face. He stood, crossed the room in 2 strides, and wrapped me in his arms, burying his face in my hair. A new foundation, he whispered. In the years that followed, we built on that foundation. We established the Iris Bellamy Foundation, not just a scholarship, but a mentorship program that paired young women from difficult backgrounds with female professionals in finance, law, and real estate. Eleonora became its first and most generous anonymous donor. Consider it an investment from one grandmother to the next generation, she said, signing the check without a single request for a seat on the board. Alastair completed his program and, while still fragile, began the slow work of rebuilding his life and his relationships. He and Eleonora sold the grand house in the West Hills and moved into a smaller, more manageable home, a quiet acknowledgement that the era of the Blackwood Empire was over. Pregnancy didn't slow me down, it focused me. It gave my fight for independence a new, more profound purpose. I was no longer just protecting my past, I was building a secure and honest future for my child. One evening, as Rowan and I stood on the porch of the cottage, my belly around, full curve under his hand, he looked out at the quiet street where Iris had lived for so long. I used to think my family's name and properties were my greatest assets, he said softly. But I was wrong. It's you, Cora. It's the strength and integrity you stand for. I took his hand and placed it on my stomach, where a tiny, insistent life was kicking. Iris once wrote in her journal, "True wealth is not what you accumulate, but what you build." It is measured not in dollars, but in the number of people you empower to stand on their own. My story is not about winning a war over an inheritance. It's about finding my voice in a family that was used to silence. It's about learning that true strength isn't about building walls, but about drawing clear, healthy, and immovable boundaries. From the pain of being tested, I learned to set my own terms, and in doing so, I didn't just preserve what my grandmother left me, I transformed it into a legacy of empowerment, starting with the child growing inside me, and extending to every young woman we could help find her own footing in the world. I am Cora Bellamy, and I am the proud keeper of my own, well-defended life.